How was 9/11 20 years ago already? If you were born before 1994, you have a clear recollection of what you were doing on the morning of 9/11. It's like the Kennedy assassination for our generation. Everybody knows what they were doing, where they were, and who they were with. What was I doing? Well, first off, it wasn't morning for me. I was actually in Lahore, Pakistan, and so it was evening then. My mom had just gotten a Fulbright scholarship, so we moved into this apartment in Defense. Defense in Lahore is a neighborhood that has a lot of military, a lot of police. It's a very secure area. So we were living in an apartment in Defense, behind walls and everything. Before that, we had actually been living in a slum, which was a really interesting experience. I'll probably go into that in another video. But on the evening of 9/11, we were in Defense. And I was in my room reading, as I am prone to do. And my little sister calls me in. She's like, Maya, get in here. I'm like, what's going on? So I go in. The TV is in there. This little TV, because we didn't have the big flat screens back then. This little TV. And I see what's going on. And I was like, that looks like an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. But the news anchors clearly informed us that this was not a movie. This was deadly serious, that there had been a major terrorist attack against the United States. New York to DC were under attack. It did look like a movie, but movies imitate extraordinary events in real life. So we watched the events in horror at what was going on back home. And my mom came into the room. My mom had just gotten a Fulbright scholarship, so we were living in this new apartment, as I said. My mom came into the room, and immediately she knew that it was over. Our comfortable lives were about to change. Our newly comfortable lives were about to change drastically. America had not ever been attacked like this in our lifetimes. Not since Pearl Harbor had America been attacked like this. And that came from a nation. That was a declaration of war. What was this? It was a huge question mark. What was going to happen? But my mom, as soon as she saw that, she knew, all right, things are about to get really messy right now. And she was right. She actually kept that room in the slum to do her research. She was doing interviews for language because the Urdu is part of the general Pi Proto-Indo-European language family. So she was studying that. She was doing interviews in that slum on Wadat Road. What she saw in the next few weeks following 9/11 was, of course, a lot of Afghan refugees fill up the slum on Wadat Road because they were fleeing the terrible bombing of Afghanistan. We didn't just bomb Afghanistan, as we all know from recent events in the news. We decided to occupy it for 20 years. I was very young back then, but I knew that we shouldn't be occupying Afghanistan for 20 years. Even then, before there was Google, you could just look up Afghanistan in the Encyclopedia Britannica, which is basically like a paper wiki, and it would tell you, hey, don't occupy Afghanistan. Here's what happened when other people tried to occupy Afghanistan. Didn't work out for them. But America thinks it knows everything. We occupied Afghanistan. It blew up in our face. I'm not even going to go into it. This is not an Afghanistan video. This is a 9/11 video. Basically, the people back home were so worried about us. They were like, how can you stay over there? It's so dangerous. I love Americans. I really do love Americans. But not every country that ends in stan is the same country. Yes, Afghanistan was involved in some way, but Pakistan is a different country. And I tried to explain this to our friends and family back home. I was like, it's pretty stable in Pakistan, actually. Nothing is really going on. In fact, we live in Defense, which is the most secure area possible. And we were living in Lahore, which is actually, women-owned businesses, women work. Very few people are wearing head-to-toe burqas. Maybe in the year and a half that I was there, I saw that once. It was a different place, but Americans. If something ends in stan, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. Because Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, it's a very unfortunate attitude that we have. Anyway, so I'm in the apartment in Defense, and we're watching these terrible events unfold. It seemed like the whole of America was under attack. DC was also under attack. There were other planes being shot out of the sky or falling out of the sky. It's fine. Whatever happened to Flight 93, we're not even going to go into it, whether it was shot down or whether the people heroically took the plane down.
We have to do something right now. Colonel, I need rules of engagement. Do we shoot this flight down?
We have to do it now, because we know what happens if we just sit here and do nothing.
Soon after 9/11, the United States, under the stewardship of Vice President Dick Cheney, President Bush. Yeah, Freudian slip. Anyway, the United States, under President Bush, decided that they were going to attack the Taliban, who had given cover to the Saudi hijackers to plan 9/11. It didn't make sense at the time. And it didn't matter that none of it made sense at the time, because they were going to go through with it, and they were the strongest people, they were the strongest nation, and they'd been hurt, and nobody was going to stop them. And nobody did stop them. Nobody really pushed back on the United States war ventures until Iraq. Other countries, at least. Other countries were just like, yo, they're going to do what they're going to do, and we don't want to be a part of it, which I get. That was a major attack, and the United States is going to do what the United States is going to do. And we weren't exactly the most compassionate nation prior to 9/11. So why would 9/11 change that all of a sudden? Like, we were a war machine. Check out War Machine on Netflix if you want to see what I think about the Afghanistan war and how everyone should have known the Afghanistan war was going to end up. That movie came out in 2017, was in production for years before that. Like, come on.
We cannot help them and kill them at the same time. It just ain't humanly possible.
Anyway, the United States was a war machine, and it was going to go ahead, and it did, and it bombed Afghanistan, and refugees filled the streets of Lahore, and my mom saw that because she still had the room on Waddat Road. We were in defense. We were fairly safe. We were incredibly safe, actually. Lahore is a fantastic city, and Pakistan is a stable country with a stable government, and it's not just going to let people run rampant through the streets of its cities. The people back home were so scared. They're like, you have to come home immediately. What's going to happen over there? You know, it's one of those stand countries. I'm like, are you kidding me? Because when I left, people weren't as ignorant as they were on September 12th. So they were begging us to come home. And my mom said no, because she had to finish her research. And when was the next time we were going to get a chance to go back there for her to finish her research if we left the country then? We would never have gone back. It's just one of those things. She's like, it's safe here. We're fine. The people are very kind to us. They're very accommodating, and they treated us as their guests. I don't know what they thought was going to happen. I really don't know what the people here thought was going to happen. I don't understand what the government thought was going to happen. I know what they may have feared would have happened, but that was an unrealistic fear. Incredibly unrealistic and kind of insulting to the people of Pakistan. Like, what do you think they are? You think they're animals? You think they're barbarians? Like, no, we're three women in a country being treated very kindly by the locals, treated as guests, and allowed to come into their homes and participate in their customs. Anyway, my mom's Fulbright got taken away. They were like, you leave and you can keep the Fulbright, or if you stay, we're taking it away and you have to leave the apartment in defense and you have to fend for yourself and finish your research. That's what she chose to do. We left this very safe apartment in defense and we moved to Liberty Market, which was basically just an open air market. We were living around the outsides. So, I mean, after that, we would just go into their bazaar pretty much every single day and just walk around in t-shirts, and nobody really bothered us. It may have been like one time that there were people who were being annoying, but there are times where people are being incredibly annoying in Los Angeles if you're just walking around in a t-shirt. So for the entire society to be gripped with this sort of hysteria, this was the first time I witnessed that. And because I was away from it, because I was from the outside looking in, I could say, you guys are kind of taking this too far. Maybe you're losing a sense of yourself. So that's really where we were coming from. Of course, we had no power in this situation. The power was entirely with the government. It was entirely with the United States. And the United States was on a war path. So there's nothing really we could do about it except just get an apartment in Liberty Market and just observe what was going on. Pakistan is different than a lot of other Muslim countries because, yes, they're Muslim and, you know, they follow the Quran and so forth and so on. They're not devoutly Muslim. They happen to be Muslim. Also, they've been to war with India like 3 times already. So they're always gearing up to go to war with India. And so Pakistan and India kind of have to keep on the same level technologically. So they can't just do rote memorization of the Quran like maybe we would do in Saudi Arabia, where the hijackers were from. So Pakistan is actually a very sophisticated nation. It has a lot of scientists, engineers, and doctors, and they have nukes. So they're always on a warpath with India, which is not funny, haha, but it is kind of funny because they used to be one country, and then there was partition, and then the Muslim part and then the Hindu part split apart, and there was a major war then. And now they're always gearing up to go to war with each other because they're each other's enemy. However, Pakistan loves Bollywood films, and a lot of Bollywood superstars are Muslim. So make it make sense. Make it make sense. But I see why this is why Obama said that he was most afraid of Pakistan. As for what keeps him up at night, someone asked Obama what keeps him up at night, and he said Pakistan. And maybe they were harboring Osama bin Laden. Anyway, Fulbright gets taken away. My mom has to take a low-paying job teaching English to support her research and to support us. She could have gotten paid as a Westerner, but my mom actually had a code, which is rare. People have codes, like, oh, I have a code, but then they don't live by them. So it's like, did you really have a code? You didn't really have a code, did you? But she actually had a code, and she would not take more money than they paid the native Pakistanis for the same work, which I understand and I appreciate. So life after September 11th wasn't exactly all roses. We didn't have the amenities like we had in defense. We didn't have air conditioning. You know, we didn't have TV, which is probably good, because we read a lot more books, and got pretty hot though. I'll say this, I did miss the air conditioning because it got really, really hot in the summers. It would be up to like 100, 110 degrees just all day, and all you could do was sleep. So to put that in perspective, think Phoenix except muggy. Now, should we have left Lahore out of an abundance of caution? Maybe. Looking back on it now, my own aunt was like, can you guys please come back? If I were my own aunt, I might say, yes, can you at least send the girls back? But from my perspective, that was an incredible experience. Like, I wouldn't be the person I am today if that hadn't happened. So I don't know. There's no right answer. How many risks can you take with a person just to make them interesting? Don't test that. Don't test it. Don't try it. Just be happy that it happened to me. That's all. From what we saw on the ground, looking around, nothing bad was going to happen to us. Nothing bad did happen to us, except that my mother lost the Fulbright scholarship, so she had to go to work, and it made the rest of our research more difficult and obviously added a lot more stress to the household. But our physical safety, that was fine. We went to an American school. No one bothered the American school either. The next day, everybody just came up to me and they're like, we're so sorry that this happened to you. We're so sorry that this happened to your nation. This is a terrible thing to have happened to you. And, you know, we really got all that sympathy. And, you know, there did start to be planes flying overhead. There did start to be like this things like, you know, the war machine is moving, you know, they're on the war footing. And so stuff is going down. But what were they doing there? I don't know. I don't know why we saw those planes flying overhead afterwards. I assume it had something to do with the attack and the bombing of Afghanistan, but Lahore is actually fairly far away. It's not super far away, but if you look, I'll put a map on the screen. It's not super close, so I really don't know what was going down. So we came back to the United States in 2002. It was the summer of 2002. We got back to the United States. I was so jaded from this whole situation. But to be fair, I was already pretty jaded to begin with. So before I left for Pakistan, I was already pretty jaded. You know, when you're a kid and you're like, oh, my mom's taking me away from all my friends and she's bringing me to this country and she's doing whatever and I have to live in a slum in this country and it's dirty and there are flies everywhere and I just want to hang out with my friends. Why is she doing this? So I was already pretty jaded going into it, but I came back super jaded. We were jaded about what happened, the Fulbright situation. The fact that why were we in Afghanistan? That didn't make any sense. The government lost its mind. We knew that by 2002, even though we were kids. Me and my sister were like, the government has lost its mind. The United States has lost its mind. All these people we thought were rational human beings, not rational human beings at all, prepared me very well for the... So that was it. That was 9/11, the story had been told. Anyway, a few years later, people start asking questions. Well, what really happened that day? Why did you get these people out instead of having them answer for what complicity they may have had? We know the people in question. Why did we attack Afghanistan and why did we attack Iraq and we didn't attack the people in question? It didn't make any sense. So people started asking questions. Quick note, this is why institutions have to be completely honest with the public in the internet age. Not because it's the easiest thing to do, but because we're going to find out anyway. And if they lie to us about one thing, we'll believe that they lied to us about everything. So quit lying. Oftentimes, the people who should be in authority don't want to be in authority. And the people who are in authority are just the people who wanted to be in authority. There was a hearing. Everybody thought the same thing. It was like, we need to get to the bottom of actually what happened on 9/11. And so all of these ideas went through the zeitgeist. Everybody was thinking anything on the spectrum, from the government knew and did nothing about it, that the government planned it. It was an inside job so that they could go ahead and get the war machine moving. That is also all the way over here. And then, of course, there's the official narrative, which is the government was just so incompetent, they couldn't do anything about it. I don't know. Do you think it is just that the government was so incompetent that it was just filled with all of these fools who failed to prevent it? And then once it happened, they're also opportunists, because there can be opportunistic fools. There are plenty of opportunistic fools out there that know how to turn a situation to their advantage. So they were able to use this to their advantage and able to use this to clamp down on privacy and to enact laws and to enact these new customs that were just goofy. The terror alert was so goofy. I trust the wildfire alert way more than I ever trusted the terrorism alert. And now they're trying to reboot it. Have you seen them trying to reboot the terrorism alerts now? Like, oh my God, just let this thing go. It's like the Sex and the City reboot. Just stop it. Leave this in the knots. Now, I kind of touched on this in the fourth turning video, but the past 20 years have been eventful. To put it nicely, it's been a crisis period. I cannot go into everything. I think I have to do a unique video, its own video, dedicated to the crisis period we've been living in for the past 20 years. But I'll just go over the highlights. We've got the Patriot Act, which is still in place, even though the war in Afghanistan is over, and the war on terrorism. How are you going to fight a war on terrorism? How are you going to fight a war on drugs? We need to stop fighting wars against abstract concepts. You're going to fight a war on sadness? Stupid shit. And I knew it was stupid as a kid. And that's why I didn't respect the government. And that's why I never tried to go into the military. I never tried to take a government job. This is sad because I feel a lot of competent people have the same understanding. They're like, why would I torture myself working with these dummies in the bureaucracy? Makes more sense to go into the private sector. I was talking to my bae the other day and I was like, for us to turn this ship around, the ship that is the United States, more competent people have to leave the private sector and go into the public sector. Well, this video shows you what I think of the public sector. So good luck with that. Okay, so back to the past 20 years of chaos. Okay, so we had the Patriot Act. Then there was Edward Snowden, who fell on his sword. Edward Snowden fell on his sword to warn us about the invasions and intrusions to our privacy. For no reason. Nobody cared. Nobody cared. Nobody cared. Nobody cared. I'm sorry, Edward Snowden. I'm sorry you're exiled in Russia now. Why try to help these people? We touched on this. We touched on this in groupthink. Why would you try to help these people? Look what happened to Edward Snowden. Chelsea Manning, WikiLeaks. It opened up Pandora's box, 9/11. And so we've been dealing with that. Now, people in the United States stopped caring about 10 years ago, but we're still dealing with these things. They're trying to extradite Julian Assange right now. He was a big hero under Bush, but right now, not so much of a hero. Funny how that works. Oh my God, nobody cares. Because before 9/11, I remember the talk amongst the adults. I remember the talk amongst the teachers that the American people are like this, and they're never going to put up with these sort of draconian rules. They're never going to put up with intrusions to their privacy like this. They will never, ever give up their rights to the government. This is America, blah, 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 blah. Post 9/11, take our rights, please. Take our rights, please. Ugh. And now, 20 years later, we know that most of the subsequent terror attacks that we were told about were actually planned by the FBI. And these stupid patsies were set up and put into prison so that they could justify their funding. Let's be honest. So the FBI could justify their counterterrorism funding. It would be more funny if all these dumb people weren't in jail, but these dumb people are in jail, and it's a little sad. I'm a little saddened by it. I'm more let down by the deep state. I know at this point, nothing that the deep state does should surprise me. Nothing that the FBI does should surprise me. But learning that most of the subsequent terror attacks were actually planned by the FBI, I'm just like, how y'all keep doing it? The FBI should write a show because they just come up with twists and turns and they keep you interested. You know, you're like, I already know everything about you. I know y'all are sneaky. I know you can't be trusted. But then they're like, wait, how much can we not be trusted? Wait for it. And it's like, oh, guys, you surprise me every time. So not funny, haha, but come on. And then they tested the TSA. Turns out the TSA didn't stop any of their bomb making material. So what are we doing with the TSA? It's a jobs program. I'm fine with the jobs program. You know, I got that little bit of socialist in me. I'm fine with the jobs program, but call it what is it? It's a jobs program. Don't say it's stopping the next terrorist attack. What it's doing is making you buy airport water, throw away the water you brought, buy those stupid little shampoos, make you take your shoes off. They used to mess with my hair. They used to go through my hair. They've stopped doing that. But they're not stopping any attacks. They're not stopping any of these FBI planned attacks. Do you remember 24? Do you remember they had a whole show to convince us that Bush's torture regime was warranted? Do you remember that? Because Bush started to torture people. Cheney started to torture people. It became accepted to torture these people. And they had a whole show to convince the American public that it was okay to torture people. That show was 24, and everybody tuned into that show. And of course, John McCain is out there like, guys, we cannot torture people. This is wrong. This is un-American. And people at home, people who had watched all seasons of 24, so they thought they were national security experts, were like, you don't know anything, John McCain. Stupid. POW, John McCain. What do you know? Like, he hadn't been tortured in Vietnam for years. Like, he wasn't the most qualified person to speak on this to begin with. Also, John McCain should have been president then. It either should have been Al Gore, who may or may not have won the 2000 election, or John McCain, who should have gotten the Republican nomination. Sneaky ass Bush and his people stole it from John McCain. Should never have been Bush. Actions have consequences. Elections have consequences. The consequence of the 2000 election, we are still dealing with to this day, not even discussing climate change. Just the fact how we handled 9/11. We had the worst possible president for 9/11. He was a joke. He was a fool. He was a clown. As far as this newfound love for W goes, I don't get it and I don't have any. And we're surprised that the government has handled like this. We shouldn't be surprised. No worse than what you did after 9/11. That's the standard now. It's no worse than what you did after 9/11. Now, I know a lot of you out there think that something very sinister went down on 9/11. People think it was an inside job. Spike Lee is releasing a docuseries. He tried to interview architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. He did interview them, but there was a pre-screening for the media. And the media just reacted so harshly to him giving these people a platform, even listening to what they have to say, that there was a backlash, and that was cut out of the final film. We can't talk about it. We couldn't talk about it. This is the first instance I remember people being like, don't even talk about that. I'm like, well, why? But can't we just work through the idea? And if it doesn't make any sense, it won't make any sense. And so that'll be it. Like, don't even talk about it. Don't even mention it. Don't even bring it up. It's better. It's so much better if we debate these things, whether it's 9/11 or if it's, and we can discuss it and the truth will reveal itself. This is my opinion. But yeah, after 9/11, could not bring that up. And to this day, you can't bring it up because Spike Lee had to cut that out of his film. It didn't go into the final cut. You let me know in the comments, are you still going to watch Spike Lee's docuseries? The official narrative, the official explanation of what went down on 9/11 seems to be winning, seems to have won. It seems to be over. It seems as though that narrative has won out against all of the conspiracy theories. I'm going to link at the bottom a talk about psyops and how the people in power, whether it be the government or the media, labels people as conspiracy theorists because they don't want to answer the questions. Now, obviously, there are conspiracy theorists out there. The idea that there were never any planes, this is very far. This is taking it very far. But labeling anybody who asks questions as conspiracy theorists, not only is that unfair, but I'm really disappointed in a public that buys into that, especially in 2021, especially after last year and the lab leak theory. Because last year, everybody was saying that the lab leak theory was a conspiracy theory, and if you're spreading this misinformation online, you're a conspiracy theorist. Now we know that it is very possible, perhaps probable. And so what about the term conspiracy theorists? We were using it so much last year. When will it be the boy who cried wolf? People who asked questions, people who asked if the government knew beforehand, they were labeled conspiracy theorists and dismissed. So the official narrative seems to have won out. You tell me. I don't really know. I wouldn't know if it didn't. Do you know what I mean? Because a lot of these groups have gone underground. The architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, they've kind of gone underground. They're not getting the press they once got. History is written by the victors, isn't it? Just the fact that we can't ask questions and the fact that the term conspiracy theorist is still being used to people who ask legitimate questions, that means media indoctrination is so much more powerful than we could have ever thought before. We know that in 2021. We learned that on the groupthink video. It is so powerful. Do you remember a few years ago, there was that meme going around that jet fuel doesn't burn hot enough to melt steel? And of course, the steel didn't have to melt. It just had to be weakened. But it was funny that that popped up about 15 years later, 15 years after the event, that popped up, that people were still thinking like, hey, jet fuel doesn't burn hot enough to melt steel. Something fishy went down. And I think that a lot of the people sharing the memes, they didn't literally mean jet fuel doesn't burn hot enough to melt steel, because you don't have to melt the steel. It can just be weakened. As we learned from Popular Mechanics, their famous article, the steel can just be weakened. That meme, jet fuel doesn't burn hot enough to melt steel, is just an acknowledgement that we don't know what really happened. So I feel like if this were 1984, not because of the book, just because it was 20 years after the Kennedy assassination, 21 years after the Kennedy assassination. So if this were 1984, would people be making jokes about the lone gunman? So that's interesting. That jet fuel doesn't burn hot enough to melt steel meme was sort of a reminder that some shady went down. I have a feeling that 20 years from now, the kids are going to look back on our time and they're going to say things like, you know, the spike protein is cytotoxic. I'm like, what does that mean? I'm not a cell biologist. I don't know what that means. But it means like, something shady went down in that lab. That's what that means. They don't know what it means either. The kids are going to be like 15 years old. They're not going to have doctorates in molecular biology. They're not going to know. They're not going to be epidemiologists, but they're going to be like, yo, spike protein is cytotoxic. Now, for people to have believed the loose change version, the controlled demolition version, this is where I think the biggest red flag is as far as the state of our society. Because for people to have believed the loose change version, the controlled demolition version, they have to believe that the government is so corrupt that it's willing to murder thousands of its own people for money. Thousands of its own people? That's a pretty big leap. A lot of people, a lot of Americans are not willing to take that leap. And if you even suggest it, they get very angry. Bill Maher got so angry one time. He tried to fight someone in the crowd. Bill Maher is a tiny little man. He's not going to fight anybody. So for people to say that forces within the United States elites, they were willing to conspire to murder thousands of Americans, that is such a bold claim. That is taking it very far, and it's kind of hard to support that. Now, I know you're going to say, look, a few members of the elite conspired to defraud millions of Americans shortly after this. Yes, they conspired to defraud them. That wasn't the government, and fraud is not murder. Now you say, look, The US government conspired with Gulf of Tonkin, they conspired with WMDs, and this led to the deaths of thousands of Americans. That's true. True as well. Still not murder. It's shady. It's very shady, but it's still not murder. So to say that there is a cabal within the United States willing to murder thousands of its own people, the controlled demolition doesn't stand up if you don't buy that. Now, for the people at home who are upset that I would even acknowledge that there is a theory that 9/11 was an inside job, but for the people at home who are upset that there are people out there who genuinely distrust the government to this extent, why? You don't understand why people don't trust the government to this extent? Really? Has your life been so sheltered that you haven't seen the other side of the US government? Never, never. Heavens to Betsy, no, not the US government. I mean, I'm saying it's a bold claim. I'm not saying it's completely untrue. I'm saying I need a lot more evidence than I have right now. That's all I'm saying. And this is where you stop getting through to people, because there are two groups. There are groups that believe, yes, they're capable of this. Yes, they would do this. And there are groups who are like, they would never do this. Not my government. And so which group do you fall into? To believe that the United States government conspired to do this, you have to believe that they are competent, that they are forward-thinking. All right, I couldn't even finish the sentence. Competent and forward-thinking, and having the ability to plan anything. Well, I don't know. That's where you get it for me. Because I'm like, yeah, controlled demolition can explain this. I don't know what happened in Building 7. But then you're like, well, the government has to be competent enough to plan this. I'm like, that's where you lost me. That's where you lost me. These people know. Did they know about it? Was information covered up? Was information ignored? Were they simply such clowns that they could not act on intelligence? That I buy. Do you think the official narrative has won out, or do you think people still whisper to each other, jet fuel isn't hot enough to melt steel? Those whispers that you hear, is everyone like, I'm over 9/11. I'm over 9/11. I'm over the recession. I'm over Donald Trump. We're on the pandemic now. America! Happy 9/11, everybody. Remember, jet fuel doesn't burn hot enough to melt steel, but also the steel didn't have to melt either. Subscribe.